So when you imagine yourself writing music, you are sitting at your instrument. So if you play the guitar, you've got a guitar in your hands, and maybe you're at your computer, maybe you're at a desk with a pencil and paper. If you're a piano player, maybe you're sitting at a piano and reaching over the piano to write music on the stand, or on music on the stand, or you've got a laptop next to you. Both of those are fine. And the way probably most of the world works, if you watch an old movie that features a composer, which there are several very good ones of, by the way, that's probably what you're going to see. You're going to see composers sitting at a piano and writing music. And that is just fine. You can do that all day long, and it's great. But let me take this brief second just to advocate for not doing that. I'm not saying you have to, and I'm not saying you're going to write better music. In fact, for a while, you're probably going to write worse music if you do it this way. But let me tell you why I don't like to do that. All the time. Sometimes I do. What I like to do is get away from my instrument. Anything I know how to play, I don't like to have handy. So I don't usually sit at a piano. I don't have a guitar nearby. And the reason is I find myself to be very limited by what I can play. So, in other words, if I'm sitting at a piano, I'm probably like a mediocre pianist. I'm not, a great pianist by any means. I can plunk my way through stuff just fine. But if I sit at a piano and I'm trying to write a piece of music, I'm going to kind of get stuck in what I can do, what my piano skills let me do. And I find it really hard to get out of that. Sometimes I write really difficult music. And that's really hard to do when I'm sitting at a piano. I never set out to write difficult music. And sometimes I don't write difficult music, but the skill level of what I'm writing is something I don't consider while I'm writing. If it turns out to be a hard piece, it's a hard piece. That's just fine by me. So for the same reason, I don't have a guitar in my hand. Now I'm a reasonably good guitar player, but I get stuck in cliches, stuff that guitars do well. And it limits how creative I can be on that thing. And maybe this is just a fault of my own. And maybe you won't have this problem, but I find that when I have the instrument in my hands and I can put my hands on it and make some sound, I get kind of stuck in what my technical ability lets me do. So for that reason, I like to get away from an instrument and just use my imagination. Sometimes I sit at a desk. I have like a drafting table in my studio here. It's like if you imagine like what an architect sits at. I have that. It's out of reach of any instruments. So I just sit there and write and use my imagination. Now, when you do that, sometimes you're going to be wrong. Sometimes you're going to write something and be like, oh, that didn't sound the way I expected it to. And that's totally okay. And we're going to talk more about that shortly, about how to develop that skill. But for now, I just kind of want to advocate that you try this. Now, this is something that in the next big section of videos, I'm going to talk about in terms of just generating ideas. But consider that if you don't have an instrument handy, you might get more creative in what you can come up with. My favorite place to write music is a loud coffee shop. So I just sit there and I can just write all day long and feel pretty comfortable doing it. I like being in a place where there's other people creating art around me. No one else is sitting there writing music. I'm definitely the weirdest person in that coffee shop, but there are people, drawing and painting. I like to go to kind of grungy coffee shops. But I find that atmosphere to be inspiring, more so than sitting in front of a computer, more so than sitting at a piano even. That being said, sometimes I do sit at a piano if I'm really trying to figure out a tricky harmony or something like that. But usually, even in that case, I'll figure out what I want to figure out, get the sound in my head, and then I'll step away from the piano and just work on it on paper once I kind of memorize the sound that I'm going for. Okay, so I just wanted to advocate for that. We're going to talk more about it when we talk about free writing, but think about it. Think about if that will work for you. And maybe that's not something you do right away. But if you are in one of my college classes, I would demand that you try this at least once. I would require you to go sit in a park and write some music for a while with no instrument in your hand just to see how it goes. Again, we're going to talk more about that soon. But for now, let's move on to the next section. The next section is about process. Now, this is going to be focused on how to get started. This is one of the hardest things that I see people struggle with. I see my students come to me all the time and say, okay, I want to write a piece for orchestra. How do I start? What's the first thing I do? It's just too daunting of a task, right? So I have a long list of tricks. Just ways to kind of kickstart the writing process, get some ideas in your head and get you up and running quickly. So in the next section, I'm going to go over a handful of those. Some tricks just to get you up and running and writing music. So let's dive into those right now.